today to the Problem Gambling Services Emerging Trends in Gambling and Gaming, implications for us in Problem Gambling Services. We welcome with us today Julie Hynes, who is our Oregon Prevention Coordinator down in Lane County. And so with that, Julie, please take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Roxanne. I really appreciate everybody who's been able to make it on the call today. I know it's August, we're in vacation mode. We're also in starting to get in school preparation mode for those of us who are prevention providers. And I know everybody on this call has a very busy plate, so really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And if you're on the recording, appreciate you being here on the recording as well. So with that, what we're gonna do today is we are gonna cover a few things. But the first things first is we want to make sure that you guys know that the complete slide deck and audio recording will be posted on OregonPGS.org. And that is your resource and your one-stop shop for all things problem gambling services. All of Roxanne's regular calls are on there, all of our workforce developments on there, treatment calls, et cetera. All of those are on OregonPGS.org. So the objectives today in 1 hour webinar are three things. One, we want to identify 3 recent electronic forms of gambling that really converge with gaming, and identify 5 key concerns related to electronic gambling, and then name at least 3 tools that we can use to address concerns on electronic gambling. Now, having said that, this presentation is not about overall use of screens and technology. I want to be clear about that because we hear a lot lately about screen time and blue light and lots of other things that have to do with screens and technology. And that is a much, much bigger conversation than what we have time for today, especially with our funding with Problem Gambling Services. We want to make sure that we're clear that we do provide the direction just around the areas of problem gambling and the convergence of gaming and gambling. So that's what this is about today. There's a quick heads up for folks on the call as well. There may be some content here that could present as a trigger to you, and if you feel like you're being triggered at all, please do feel free to take care of yourself, give yourself a break, step away from the phone, step away from the computer, do whatever it is that you need to feel safe and to take care of yourself. So we're going to jump right in. Trends. The first piece about this is kind of learning about what the heck is going on with gaming and gambling these days. And when we look at gaming and gambling, we really see a lot of convergence and a lot of blurriness around them. This was in Seattle Airport a couple of months ago. It's a lottery machine at SeaTac Airport, and it has a lot of animations. And for those of you who may be of my generation who used to know about the game Centipede, or maybe you're younger and you like to play it as a throwback game, Centipede is, this is just a way for introduction for people to get interested in this. Actually, it's a scratch machine for lottery. And it looks animated. It's a video game, and it's a kiosk, and it's very easy for anybody to access. And it's hard to even see the age restriction on there. You might be able to see it in the very, very top right-hand corner where it says you must be 18 in order to play. But the thing is that we don't even think about scratch-it tickets as being gambling in a lot of cases. The folks that we work with, the community members who we talk with, they don't even think a lot of times that scratch-it tickets are gambling. So if we talk about something like a video game and possibly putting money on the line, that's even less of a connection for them. And so it's a harder stretch for us to make. And so it's important for us to kind of learn about that and to understand what's going on in the world of the trends. Now, all of us on this call know this definition, but it's just important to reiterate that we're putting something on the line. We're risking something of value in the hopes of getting something of greater value. And that's really the foundational piece about gambling. And as we go forward through the slides, it's important for us to kind of understand why this is relevant in terms of gaming and gambling, in terms of the risking of something of value, because there's no definition in there that mentions anything about money. When we look at the legal definition of gambling, we take a look at 3 pieces, 3 components that are really critical. And all 3 need to be into play in order to be considered to be gambling. 1, prize. Is there something you can gain out of it? So something, it could be of value to you, even if it's not a tangible thing that you can touch. It could be even real money. It could be a virtual reward to help advancing in a game, but some kind of prize has to be in play in order to meet the definition of gambling. Second piece is chance. So chance, meaning what we all know to be true, is some kind of element of uncertainty in the game. And this is outside of our direct control. So for an example, an instant win game, a scratch-it ticket, it could be an instant win game even at a fast food restaurant. The third component, final component is consideration. And it's an interesting word, but basically what it means is that you're putting something on the line. You're either risking money or you're risking some kind of effort for it. And so in gambling, we know this to be true, that you usually put money on the line. Usually say, I would like to place my money in the video poker machine, or I would like to place a bet on the Dodgers versus the Giants, something like that. But if we look at in a different method of significant effort, you might know people that play, say, Candy Crush or other games, other apps on their phones, and invite their Facebook friends in order to get new tries at a game or new lives at a game quicker than they would have to wait otherwise. And that is also part of that piece of consideration. And so those are the three things that we need to think about when we look at whether something is gambling or just gaming. The first trend that I'd like us to look at today is freemium. It is a convergence, or portmanteau, if you will, of free and premium. And free apps, these are free things because manufacturers have known that if they charge you money for the apps, that they're not going to get as many people installing the apps or buying the apps. But if they give them to you for free, they get you interested in the game, excited about the game, and then you have the opportunity to have in-app purchases. And you see this almost everywhere on almost all the games these days. So what is freemium and how it works is really relevant. And we'll take a look at that in the next slide. But before we do that, I really want us to think about also the age piece about these games. Most of these games are very easily downloadable, no matter what age restrictions that they have on them. And unless you're a parent or a concerned other that has monitoring either software or restrictions on the device, you can easily download any kind of game, no matter what rating that it is. And so, for example, my son comes up to me. We have an old device that he's allowed to use every now and then. And he comes up to me and he says, Mom, can I download this game? I have to take a look at it. I have to scroll through it, see what the game looks like, yada, yada, and see what the rating looks like. In many cases, this doesn't happen, and it's just part and parcel to the trends of the recency of everything, and parents oftentimes don't even think about needing to even look at these, especially if it's a game like Willy Wonka Slots Free Casino. Willy Wonka. So this is the example of Willy Wonka. So this is a credit store, so this is how freemium works. Okay, so you download this game for free, and there's thousands of them, so this is just one little example. But if you can see here on the credit store, you can use your real money. On the right-hand side there, you can see the $1.99 on the lower right-hand corner here, where you can get $1.99. You can buy all of these Wonka coins, 2.5 million Wonka coins, and you get free. Look at that, you get extra for free on there. And then you also get VIP points, which enables you to also do better in advance in the game. And as you can see, as it goes up, you can spend more money on virtual items. And this is all something that's very easily done as long as the credit card is linked to the device, which in many cases it is. You get free prizes, you can get candy. Many folks on this call are aware of Candy Crush Saga, or there's different forms of this game, but Candy Crush is still something every time I travel or every time I walk around there, sitting at a bus stop or something, I love to watch what people are doing. And oftentimes they're playing a game, and many times actually they're still playing Candy Crush, and it's really interesting to see because we can just kind of zone out on these games, but when we're actually spending some money on them to try to advance in the game because we're frustrated at a certain level of the game. This is very common for people to start spending money, and it's very easy for us to start spending money on it a little bit at a time. Especially once that first 99 cents gets spent, it's really easy to start spending more. And so that's basically freemium and the free and premium combined, and it's basically kind of microtransactions within a game. As far as Facebook, we know young people really aren't using Facebook much anymore, but it's just a heads up, especially for folks on the call that may be either working with older adults, with clients, middle-aged folks, other people that are still on Facebook. More than half of the Facebook games of the recent studies showed that they included gambling content, and about 1/5 of those are slot-based games. And so even within a game that might not even be a gambling-related game, there are oftentimes gambling-related features within those. And so when we look at like a typical freemium scenario of how freemium works, if you've ever played a video game and you've gotten one for free, you know how this works. Is like, wow, cool, I got this free game. This is really rad. I'm playing, I'm having fun. I'm talking to my friends about it. I'm on a certain level. And if you haven't known, if you haven't played games like this is kind of how it works. Is people download these games, they play for free to have fun, and then as the game progresses, it gets harder and harder to level up without using a little bit of money. And so you may be on like level 27. Let's say, especially if you're a young person, you're thinking about, wow, my buddy's on level 33 and I'm only on level 27. What does this mean for me? I gotta try to get advance in the game. And so it gets harder to advance. So level 1 through 10 might be easy, just as an example, and level 11 might get harder, level 12 is even harder, and so forth. And so the enticement of the game with the pop-ups within the game is something that regularly happens to try to say, hey, you know, you could get this little bonus that's going to help you out with the game to advance. And so money ends up getting spent, and then people are able to advance a little bit easier within the game. Now the next thing is, oh, apologies for DFS being cut off there on the top, daily fantasy sports. So there's a lot going on in the news, which we'll discuss in a second with regard to sports betting. But with regard to the DFS sites or daily fantasy sports sites, DraftKings and FanDuel are the two most popular websites, is that these really are probably going to change and manifest themselves in some other way monetarily, but they're not really going anywhere. Fantasy sports isn't going anywhere. And if you're not very familiar with fantasy sports, it's basically like you want to create the most awesome team that you could ever create. So if I wanted to say, create a really cool basketball team of my choosing, I would pick LeBron James and Steph Curry and so forth. And I would go pick that, even though they're not on the same team, I would place my, I'm going to call it wager, on their particular performance during a certain game. And there's a lot more extensive stuff with fantasy sports, but it's an individual performance. And this is what makes gambling happen even more easily when we look at sports betting, because you're not really just betting on, say, the Cavaliers versus the Warriors. You are betting on individual performers and how they do in a game. And it could potentially be limitless. You could say, well, LeBron's going to get 45 points today. You could say LeBron's going to get 12 free throws today. LeBron's going to get 7 3-pointers today. LeBron's going to get 11 rebounds today, and so forth. And so each one of those little pieces and components can be a separate bet. And that's why this is really relevant when we start then thinking about problem gambling. So fantasy sports sites, they will change in some way, but they're not going anywhere. So related to that, in the news, we know that recently in May, a 25-year-old federal ban on legalized sports bets for all practical purposes has been reversed. Except the only state that was previously for all practical purposes, although there were 3 other states, including Oregon, that did have some kind of sports betting. For practical purposes, it was just Nevada. It is about a $150 billion illegal market in the United States, estimated by Gambling Compliance and other sources. This number is really hard to pin down because it's illegal. And so this is the illegal total market. It's not the overall revenue, but it is the illegal market, and it's a really, really huge market. And so now with the Supreme Court having decided and saying, okay, basically states, you can decide whether you want to legalize gambling in your state, that's a really big deal, because this was a longstanding 1992, the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, was repealed, and that basically said that states, it's up to them to decide whether they're going to authorize sports betting on their own. So this was quickly followed by Delaware, New Jersey, and then other states that are working on legalizing sports betting. This is an ESPN sports betting bill tracker. The links are all down here, by the way, if you want to ever take a look at these. But you can keep tabs on this yourself if you'd like to see. So if you see the red ones there are the ones that already offer full-scale legalized sports betting. So if you wanted to place a sports bet and you live in the state of New Jersey, or if you live in the state of Delaware, or you live in the state of Nevada, you could do that right now. The blue states are ones that are working on it. The recent bill passed, and they're looking at, most of these states here are looking at starting by fall for NFL season. Now, if you look to the left there, you see that Oregon is still in the gray, the light gray, no recent bill introduced. We do have an authorization to implement the sports action lottery. That is a grandparented law that allows us to offer games by chance with sports action lottery, but it is not a live in-game kind of game. So say you wanted to bet on the Raiders versus the Ravens, okay, in football. You couldn't do that here in Oregon yet. And we also know that in 2019, we have a long legislative session. We can expect to see legislative activity to this front in Oregon as early as 2019. In fact, I would bet on it. Ha ha ha. What about online sports betting across state lines? That's still illegal. There is a law called the Wire Act of 1961. Now, we didn't have the internet in 1961, as we know, but it was really preventing wire transactions or phone transactions for betting or giving crucial information about bets across state lines. So if you lived in Oregon and you wanted to place a bet in Nevada, it's still illegal. If you live in Oregon and now you wanted to place a bet in Delaware or New Jersey, which also offers sports betting, it's still illegal. If you lived in Maryland, right across the bay from Delaware, it's still illegal. So we will see what happens with the Wire Act, but it's just important for us to know as Oregonians that it is still not legal for Oregonians to place sports wagers across state lines. So let's play Guess the Sport. Let's see if anybody wants to put their answer in the chat box. Let's see who's awake and alive this morning. So this is a recent screen grab from ESPN. The blank smashed the blank's hopes of winning in the blank playoffs, securing a 3-0 victory during week 2 of the blank semifinals at the blank arena in California Friday night, and will advance to the inaugural finals in New York next week. And it goes on. Now I'm going to wait, see if anybody throws in a question on the chat box. And please don't make us wait for like 5 minutes, folks. Come on now. Somebody's got to throw in a guess. All right, we got crickets. Nobody's throwing in a guess? Bueller, anyone? Roxanne? The answer is Overwatch. Overwatch is a video game, very popular video game. There's lots of these video games that are out. This is the London Spitfire team, smashed the Los Angeles Valiants teams in hopes of winning the inaugural Overwatch League playoffs. And the Blizzard Arena, Blizzard is a company that makes a bunch of different video games very popular. And you can watch this on ESPN. In fact, my family was turning on ESPN last Friday night for movie night at our house. Friday night's movie night. We have movies and pizza, and I'm a big sports guru, sports nut. So I turned on, the first channel when I turn on the TV, pops up is ESPN, and Overwatch was actually the Overwatch finals were actually happening at that time. But yeah, so this is something that is key. These are video games that are the new form of competitive video gaming. This is the new form of sport. New York Times published an article a couple of months ago saying all we want to do is watch other people play video games. Gamers are the new stars. Esports arenas are the new movie theaters. Video games are beginning their takeover of the real world.
Hey, Julie. Unfortunately I had myself on mute, and so I was talking to you during your question there. We did have Susan from Marion County put in youth baseball, Kelly Lucy from Benton put in arena football, and then Paige Hosford down in Douglas County actually guessed video game. So
nice.
I apologize. I was muted, and I'm talking.
No worries.
So here we go.
You. Paige for the win. Boom. I have nothing to give you except my appreciation. And thank you for the other questions or the other guesses, because they're some people usually say soccer because it kind of tends to look a little similar. But so yeah, so thank you for that, Roxanne. So esports competitive video gaming. Now, if we take a look at this on a different kind of scale, we're all familiar with the traditional kinds of sports leagues, right? We know NFL, we know NBA, we know golf, we know Major League Baseball, yada yada. Esports is an umbrella term for the new wave of video gaming. Okay, so when somebody says I bet on esports, they're not just betting on esports. That would be like saying I'm betting on sports. You bet on football, you bet on baseball, you bet on basketball, right? And so esports is a similar kind of umbrella definition. And if we take a look at some examples here, and there are many more, but these are very popular examples, we have World of Warcraft, we have Counter-Strike Global Offensive, otherwise known as CSGO, League of Legends, Overwatch, which we just talked about, Dota 2, StarCraft, and the most popular one, and if you are around kids at all, you are aware of this game called Fortnite. We'll talk about Fortnite in a minute. But there are now scholarships. This is so popular, there are now scholarships. If you look at this website, High School Esports League, they bring esports to high schools. They offer scholarships, rewards, and more. It is not an NCAA or NAIA sanctioned sponsored sport yet. None of these esports are, but there are scholarships being offered. There are also club sports for, like, say, Big Ten, Pac-12, other big leagues have these tournaments. They have competitions, and they are club sports within their schools. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. There's even been conversation about having one of the esports as being an Olympic sport at some point. That will be very interesting to see what pans out with that. When we look at sports like this kind of meta, it's sporting of a sport, video gaming of a sport, is NBA 2K is one big example of the convergence of gaming and traditional sports. So in the middle there, the bald guy is, if you don't recognize him, he is Nate Silver. He is the NBA commissioner. He was recently at the NBA 2K video game draft, announcing the recent draftees. This is the Mavs, or the Mavericks, Cleveland, #1 2K league pick, the quote-unquote LeBron James of the NBA 2K. Now LeBron's gone, but this was a couple months ago, and you can see there that if you took a look at the live streaming of it, you'd see it's kind of a smaller version of the traditional NBA draft picks. They announce the draft picks. There's a lot of excitement around #1, #2, who's going to choose who's going to do what, and so this is really mainstream now. If you're not familiar with it, if you're already familiar with it, you've already seen it, but it's really, really mainstream now, the convergence of the video games. And the athletes themselves in traditional sports are really into this, and they play against each other. In fact, recently there was a streaming game on Fortnite called with a streamer called Ninja, and he was playing with Drake, the hip hop star, and they had about 500,000 people live streaming that. So in terms of money, how this looks is it's a big industry. So competitive video gaming looks to be about a $1.5 billion industry in just about a year and a half. And as I just mentioned with the streamer Ninja, as mentioned, as playing with Drake, the hip hop guy, there are a lot of people watching streaming. There's just a ton of people watching it. And if you go to twitch.tv, you can see it, and you can see live the amount of people that are watching the games. In fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. You gotta love when you're a county employee and you're live streaming video games. That's gotta be a good look. So this is the live right now happening Universal Open Rocket League. That's a game that's being played. You can see the live people watching each of these individual games. We got 64,000 people watching this one. Fortnite, people are watching right now. They've got 209,000 people watching Fortnite right now, and so forth. And then they have live streamers, who are the people that are really the big stars. In fact, I was in Philly a couple of months ago, and they were talking about having Twitch. This guy, or excuse me, Ninja. He's a streamer. He was more popular than Michelle Obama, who was at an event with the kids. They just were really super excited about seeing Ninja, who streams on Twitch. And as of a couple of days ago, he's got 9.5 million followers on his Twitch channel.
So Julie, we had a question from Kelly, wondering on how do these live stream games generate money if people do not have to pay to watch?
Great question. So Twitch is one of the channels, and they do get money from subscriptions and from premium content. The streamers themselves get money from endorsements. So they can have ads, they can have endorsements, and it's very, very similar to how athletics or how traditional athletes go. So, and I'm sorry to keep bringing up LeBron James, but since we're there, LeBron can get a contract to have his shoes sold, and that's kind of an endorsement of a product. And ESPN can have advertising for Pepsi, for Budweiser, et cetera. And so this is kind of how it operates. It operates very, very similar to traditional sports. Additionally, there's also the merchandise content, so people can buy merch from the streamers themselves. They can buy merch from the channels themselves, and also there's ticket sales that go into the events and tournaments themselves. So I hope that answers that question. It's a great question, Kelly. Thanks. And if it doesn't, Roxanne, just come in and interrupt me in a minute because I can't see. I'm only seeing our chatting, not anybody else's. So in terms of gambling, how this affects gambling, you know, a game like Fortnite, which is all the rage right now, and that's why I'm mentioning it, it's not a very complicated game to learn how to play, unlike a lot of these role-playing games and other kind of games that are out there. In fact, kids 8, 9 years old playing Fortnite, it's also a game that can be easily bet on. There's a lot of different variables within the game. There are ways to play by yourself or solos. There's ways to play with 2 people or duos, and there's way to play with 4 with squads. And so there's different ways to play within the game that enable it to be easily bet on. There are many other games that are easily bet on as well, but this one is just probably a clickbait article to try to attract attention because Fortnite is all the big thing these days. So how do people gamble on esports? One is they can go and bet on professional gaming teams in tournaments, either going to the tournament itself or watching online, and just like any other traditional kind of sporting event. 2 is fantasy esports, is another method of being able to gamble. And in fact, DraftKings has a League of Legends esport content, and we'll see this expand throughout the years as we go forward. The number 3 piece is betting on in-game decorations or skins. Now, for those who aren't familiar with skins, it's kind of like a way to decorate. If you were to think about having an avatar of your own in a video game, and if you wanted to like put on cooler clothes or something, you could buy something to put on yourself in the in-game. And traditionally, most of the time, what these are they're actually the ways to decorate weapons within a game. And there are ways to purchase the weapons, and there are ways to gamble the weapons. And these are really critical for a lot of young people to have the coolest weapon out there, the coolest skin out there. It doesn't really affect the game itself. It doesn't affect their performance within the game. It just kind of gives them more street cred. These are 3 examples of kind of the things that are there. People that are designers can decorate them, can make them, and then sell them. But there are also ways to gamble on them. So if you have a skin that you might want to upgrade, you might put it on the line or risk it for an improved skin, a chance to get an improved skin. And this is an example of one of the ways to do this. This is kind of a roll, quote unquote roll. There are roulette games, there are dice games, there are other ways to do this to try to get a better skin. And this is really something that kids are particularly prone to because they think that they have the opportunity to win. There's a lot of controversy a couple of years ago around some conflict of interest that happened with somebody that owned a company and then got especially young kids to try to put something on the line in order to get a better skin. But people end up spending in-game coins or in-game things of monetary value in order to get better skins. And that all ends up with real money in the end. Prize, chance, consideration. At some point, and we don't have time for today, at some point I'd recommend you to watch this if you haven't seen it already. This is an ESPN Outside the Lines story. It's a little under 7 minutes long, and it talks about Counter-Strike, one of the video games, spawning a multi-billion-dollar world of online casino gambling. And it's really unregulated. There's no federal regulation around this. There's no state regulation around this. And there's very little awareness about it. And so people aren't even sure, even their own kids are actually gambling, and they could be sitting with them thinking they're just playing a video game. This is a kid that ended up spending quite a bit of money on skins and ended up with a gambling problem. Thankfully, he's in recovery. The estimate right now is that esports betting is about a $2.3 billion market. And again, that's an estimate. It's really hard to pin down these figures. If you want to take a look also at some of these articles, feel free to click away when you get to the website. So we already kind of talked about microtransactions and the real money and the virtual prizes, but this is really critical when we think about people in recovery, also from gambling problems. There are a lot of folks that probably on the call that have heard about people that have gambling problems and that are in recovery and yet playing games like Candy Crush or other games that have very similar feel in terms of the way this game is played, the sounds, the animations, and then ultimately also the ability to spend money on them. I used to teach at U of O, and I had one kid who's an international student. Sorry to say kid, but you know, I'm old now, so they all seem like kids to me. He was a young guy, and he said that he spent $1,000 on Candy Crush in the last year. It just, and he justified it by saying it was his cost of entertainment. Now let's look at loot boxes. For those of you who have not heard about loot boxes or loot crates, they are another form of microtransaction within a game. And so what happens is that it's kind of like, you know, when you go to one of those little toy machines at the store, right? You go, you stick your quarter in, and you hope you get something really cool out of there. You hope you get the coolest thing that you want out of there. Most likely, you're going to get some little piece of crap that you're not really interested in. But it's possible that you could get something really cool out of there. So that's kind of like a loot box. That's kind of the analogy of a loot box. It's another form of a microtransaction. You got to put something on the line. So it's usually like in-game currency, and that the way that the thing opens up is very, very interesting. This one's not opening, but what will happen is that you put something on the line, and then you see it opening up, and it's just all the lights, all the characteristics of it. Or again, it's that intermittent reward piece. It's that uncertainty. It's the dopamine release that happens when somebody puts something on the line to try to open that loot box to see if they can get something really cool to help them with the game. And so even though it's virtual, it is something that can really help them progress within a game. And this is something that has really grown and is concerning to a lot of people who are concerned about potential gambling behavior among young people. So what about the relationships and the risks? Let's take a look about why this is important to us. There are a lot of connections here between video games and gambling. In fact, there was an article last year that said how video game companies are using gambling tactics to make customers addicted. So the video game companies are borrowing casino industries and gambling industries' ways of marketing and advertising and promotion. And there are very, very similar connections there. Yet, gaming addiction is not yet in the DSM. We know that gambling disorder is, gaming disorder is not. It is warranting further research before it's considered. However, the World Health Organization recently defined in its International Classification of Diseases 11, or ICD-11, gaming disorder as an addictive behavior. There are 3 ways that it's considered. There are no diagnostic criteria within the WHO's ICD-11 or any ICD codes, but these are the 3 characteristics of defining how people call it gaming disorder. Impaired control, increasing priority given to the games, and then escalation despite negative consequences. But there are a lot of doubts out there. In fact, even New York Times this last month, endless gaming may be a bad habit. That doesn't make it a mental illness. So I ask the people on the call here, have we heard this story before? I answer it with, rhetorically I'm asking, I answer it with yes, we have heard this story before. And where have we heard it? We've heard it in our own field. We've heard for years problem gambling isn't a real addiction. We're finally getting to the place where we're hearing problem gambling is a real addiction. And yet we're hearing this about internet gaming is, no, that's not really real. People are just spending too much time on it. They need to get outside. They needed to stop. We've heard this story before. And so we look at crosswalking the gaming and gambling disorder criteria. There are ways to do that. Nancy Petrie, who actually just passed away a couple of weeks ago, was a brilliant researcher in Connecticut. And what she did was she actually crosswalked the substance use disorder and gambling disorder and then gaming problem instruments. And there's the whole article is on the bottom there if you want to check that out, the entire article. But I'm going to summarize it in this slide. What she did was she looked at all of the criteria and then crosswalked them and found all of these similarities in gambling disorder and gaming disorder. Tolerance, preoccupation, using it to escape, inability to cut back or quit, irritability when cut back and quitting, chasing, lying and concealing, and risking or losing relationships. The key differences were, one, continuing despite negative consequences, which was a gaming disorder criteria, and interestingly, not a gambling disorder criteria, although we know this to be true among problem gamblers, that yes, they do continue despite negative consequences. And then bailouts was the gambling piece and not defined within the gaming disorder. Those were really the only two differences. And we know from our work with problem gambling that it's not about the money. It may seem like it's about the money. It may start with the money, but gaming and gambling and dopamine are all about that uncertainty, that intermittent reward, that potential gain, and the dopamine release that happens when that person expects to get something out of it. We also know that youth are the most susceptible to dopamine, and the brain's still developing to 25, and that prefrontal cortex, which helps with things like executive functioning, decision-making, impulse control, and even empathy. Those are the last parts of the brain to develop. And so we think about susceptibility and we think about gaming and gambling in kids. We have to keep these pieces in mind. There are also other risk groups that we need to think about. People with physical disabilities, older adults, people with mental health issues, people that are taking prescription medication or might have other addiction problems, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, people who are incarcerated or recently incarcerated, even stay-at-home parents. Think about the boredom and the things that people do to escape. Military, veterans, athletes, LGBTQ, people of color. These are all other at-risk groups. And we look at the similarities between internet gaming disorder and pathological gambling. People who are doing this are less sensitive to loss, so they might lose, but they're like, oh, it's okay, I'm going to get one around the corner, right? Chasing. They're more reactive to gaming and gambling cues, and so that advertising and marketing and promotion piece becomes crucial because the manufacturers know that people are interested in these cues, and they will exploit that. And then finally, people make more impulsive choices. And so after I've already spent $1, after my credit card's already linked, it's easy for me to go ahead and continue playing and continue putting stuff on the line. There's research around the freemium piece, around adolescents playing simulated gambling games. For those of you who have been in the field for a while, you know this to be true, that adolescents playing simulated gambling games are more likely to later move to real gambling. Captain Obvious shows up and says, duh, but they're also more likely to have later gambling problems. And that's crucial for us to think about because of the grooming piece, and we know this to be true in prevention with, candy, cigarettes, with other mocktails, with other cues. These are the same disorders, people. The same disorders in everything but the money. It's the same thing. And we, I argue, are most equipped. We in problem gambling services are the most equipped to deal with gaming disorders. Because if we don't, who's going to do it? If we're not prepared, who's going to do it? We see that all of these criteria are the same. And therefore, because the criteria are the same, we're equipped. We might not have all the details and information about every single little piece of technology, but we are the ones who are most equipped to deal with it. And so that's why when we look at addressing the issues, it is important for us to think about how we can work together, how we can exploit and use, and exploit is maybe not the word I want to use, but how we can use our resources together and pool them. Because we have real big barriers in our profession. Okay, so we all know that tobacco, sorry to pick on tobacco, but man, the tobacco people have all the resources. They're like the 2018 Prius. They're like well-oiled machine. They've got everything working for them. They're really efficient. And then we have people who work in the substance abuse field. Some of you may wear both of these hats. And I kind of think about it like a 2008 Camry. It's cool, it works, right? Maybe not the coolest and best thing, but it's still good. In problem gambling, yeah, we're probably the trailer. We're trying to hitch ourselves to anything else that we can possibly hitch ourselves to with a limited amount of resources we have. Also, we're in Oregon, so this is a good trailer. If we were somewhere else like Virginia, Texas, Colorado, Nevada, even, we wouldn't have these resources. So thankfully, we at least have each other. So we got to cling to each other and use the resources that we have because the barriers in our profession are really real. And so we think about, well, what you're talking about gaming and gambling being the same thing. That freaks me out. I don't want to have to do anything else. Well, this is our way in. This is our way into the schools. This is our way into the parents. This is our way in. As long as we make sure that we talk about problem gambling and not just the gaming piece. Let's not just talk about kids in Fortnite and Candy Crush. Let's talk about how it connects with gambling. So what can we do in Oregon? Probably 3 critical things. There are other things that we can do as well, but prevention, education, and awareness is critical. Talking about these issues, letting folks know that these things are real, that there are connections. You'd be surprised, and you guys have probably done some of this as well, of how many people you talk to that say, wow, I never even thought about in-game transactions as being potentially gambling. Or wow, I never thought that skins were a thing, like my kids actually gambling. So awareness is critical. That's the first step to any kind of campaign. Thankfully, we have community readiness where we find out where our communities are in terms of understanding and preparation for dealing with problem gambling prevention. But we can also track policy. We can work with stakeholders. And I'm really excited to be on this call today because I hope that someone else in some other county on this call also has a lobbyist. In Lane County, we have a lobbyist. I know Marion, I believe Marion does, Clackamas, Multnomah, and I forget what other county. But when you have a lobbyist, what they can do is they can track particular policies for you. They can also help connect you with legislators. And if we could work together, we might be able to get our lobbyists to work together to follow some policy, to see if we can get our county commissioners on board with any potential legislative changes to the extent that we can, working in a bureaucracy. Tracking policy is critical, especially when we look at future sports betting legislation, which is just around the pike. We can also talk about identification, referral to treatment, using those screening tools that we have, and expanding around just the definitions and letting folks know that there are expanding definitions around what is gambling and letting them know that some of these pieces do meet the criteria for prize, chance, and consideration. We can also talk about screen activity to the extent that it connects with problem gambling. And I want to be clear, to the extent that it connects with problem gambling. So talking about parental controls, using those 4 major wireless carriers of AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, and using those and saying, here's how to control your in-game transactions, here's how to control how to lock down the internet itself if you need to, et cetera, et cetera. Educating parents around the whole issue around problem gaming and gambling and how those intersect, and then monitoring payments, disconnecting them from devices, especially when parents often let their kids use their devices. One time I was sitting next to my kid, my younger one, and my daughter was in a class. She was doing a class and then sporting event, and I was sitting next to my son. He's playing Angry Birds. Within a matter of about a minute, he had spent $3 on in-game transactions because my credit card was connected to it. And this was a few years ago, but it was like, man, wow, this is really easy to do. And so making sure that payments are being monitored, following the credit card bills. One of the things that parents don't realize is when their kids go on and play a game online, there is a gaming app that's called Steam, and it's downloaded on a desktop device. There's ways to pay within that from a transaction method called Valve. And what it looks like is when you pay for something, it looks like you're just paying for the in-game itself. It never says anywhere that you're betting on a skin. It just looks like, oh, you just spent $2 on a game. And so making sure that parents are aware of those things, that they're following it, that they're tracking it, and that they're talking with their kids regularly about it. As we know in prevention, it's all connected. Researchers recommend that overall prevention initiatives are most effective that address risk factors and protective factors. And all of the stuff that we're doing throughout Oregon is awesome, and it also will be effective, I believe, in problem gambling. Evaluation is key. That's something that's I would say is our weakness. It's definitely one of mine, but we can definitely look at seeing how overall risk factors and protective factors can be really helpful to address, picking 1 or 2 of those and focusing on that. The pieces in bold here are individual peer pieces in bold are the ones that are particular to that have been studied to be particular to problem gambling. The rest of these risk factors, and you can take a look at them sometime when you have some time to really digest them in the 4 domains, the rest of these are actually connected with gaming and gambling. So if you look at the family, for example, these are all connected: family history of antisocial behavior, family parental gambling, family conflict. Gaming and gambling seem to be parallel in terms of those risk factors and so forth. Heads up, the National Council on Problem Gambling. I would encourage you to become a member of the National Council on Problem Gambling. It really helps with learning more. There are webinars that are available. There's a Journal of Gambling Studies which comes out, and it's quarterly gambling studies, and it is awesome. It pays for itself because it's a very expensive subscription, but you get a lot of research, the latest what's going on with gambling. You get a discount to the national conference, which FYI will be July 19th and 20th in Denver, Colorado next year. So that's pretty exciting. But the National Council on Problem Gambling also has a prevention committee, which I encourage you to think about joining, and you can connect with either me or Roxanne about that. We also have an emerging trends task group. We're putting together some white papers. We put together a white paper on Bitcoin, on loot boxes, and on, I can't remember the third thing, but we're putting together some white papers. In terms of providing services, using the same effective strategies. As I already mentioned, you don't have to know all the details of the new technology, all the ins and outs of every single thing, but you're effective in what you do. You're already doing a really awesome job. You don't have to have every single detail of this, but the strategies that you're using are already really effective. In Oregon gambling treatment, as a reminder, a person must have a concurrent gambling disorder or have a significant other with gambling disorder in order to qualify for problem gambling treatment so far in Oregon. I want to work on that, but that's a conspiracy. Including the new language around any kind of awareness or education for those who don't think that they're gamblers, maybe making some educational materials. This is something that we developed, but you probably are already maybe working on something, or if you're not, please let me know. I can share this with you, or if you have something you'd share, please share it with Roxanne so we can get it out there to the rest of the providers. And making sure that we're including gambling and conversations about alcohol, drugs, and technology. And that's the way we're getting in the door. In recovery, we talk about adding, not subtracting. You don't gamble. You don't not think about chocolate cake. You think about other things that you can do. And so for folks who are in treatment, and I'm not a treatment provider, but this is the information that has been shared, is replacing with skill-based activity, especially for someone who's a gaming person. You want to replace it with something that they can do for skill. So a lot of gamers are competitive. They want to progress in something. So think about other ways to do this. One of my acquaintances is a surfer, and he goes out and surfing as his skill-based activity. He tries to get better at it. He tries to practice it. It's really fun for him. Practicing mindfulness. There are also a lot of apps that are really helpful out there. Calm is an app. I like it. It doesn't help me get calmer because I'm a spaz, but it does help with being a little bit more mindful about where I am, what I'm doing, and being present. There's one called OMG. I can meditate. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Breathing Zone. You may see all sorts of other apps that you may know that are helpful for folks in terms of being mindful. Now, that is a caveat that they're not addicted to the screen itself. And then thinking about social replacements. So particularly for people who game, it's similar to problem gamblers. Either they're isolated or they have the few people that they game or gamble with. And so thinking about cutting that off is really, really difficult, especially for a young person. You're cutting off their identity in many cases. And so thinking about how to integrate those social replacements for them, getting them involved in some kind of other activity, other kind of social engagement, so that they do feel that addition and not subtraction. Finally, one last helpful resource for folks. I cannot recommend this gentleman enough. His name is Cam Adair, and he runs a site called Game Quitters. He is in recovery himself from his gaming addiction. He's been very open about it. He's been awesome about contributing and providing as much free information for folks as he can. There is a forum online on Game Quitters. He provides YouTube videos. He provides chat. He does Twitter. He does all of the things that really help engage people around encouraging them around quitting gaming, or at least taking a break from gaming. And he does something he calls a 90-day detox, in which he encourages people to just start off there, see where they're at after 90 days, and see if they can integrate it back into their lives. Cannot recommend this guy enough. He's awesome. So for that, I want to open it up. We have 10 minutes. I want to open it up if anybody has any questions or if they have any contributions, to please do that. I really appreciate being on this webinar with everybody today, and I want to make sure that people feel like they have the opportunity to contribute as well. So I'm going to just stop here and go ahead and hand it back to Roxanne.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. We do have a question from Kelly. She was wondering if there are any handouts for youth around gaming prevention, healthy limits. She's not seen any on our Oregon Problem Gambling Services. And so have you created a handout?
Yes,
or aware of some?
I have a brochure around gaming and gambling, and let me go ahead and pull that up. I have one for is around youth and gaming and gambling, but let me just ask: is it in terms of just setting limits, Kelly? Because I don't have anything that's specific to limit setting.
Let's see. I'm trying to find Kelly. Hi, Kelly. I've unmuted you, I think, maybe. There. Kelly, I've unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Kelly,
Okay.
I missed your voice.
Hey, Julie. So I'm just thinking we've got some of our healthcare providers have an event coming up and they're asking for handouts or things to have. So I'm mostly just thinking like if something that would appeal to youth if they're coming by a table that would help maybe start a conversation.
Okay, yeah, brochures brochures are not appealing to kids. Yeah, that's a good question. No, we don't have anything yet, but maybe we should do that. Maybe we should start something up where we can get something that could be engaging enough for young people to grab and to be like a short, sweet, like 5 points, here's how to, set limits kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
So I'm not seeing any other questions, but please feel free if you get it in there, and I can also try to unmute you. If I unmute people one at a time, we usually don't get the huge feedback. But while we're waiting, I just wanted to again thank Julie for your presentation. As we move forward, the gambling landscape is ever changing. It changes as fast as we can sit here and say that. And so we know that technology is constantly improving. New things are coming out, and we want to make sure that you as providers have as much information, and that's why we hosted today's Emerging Trends webinar with Julie, who could then share what her experience has been out in the community in Lane County, as well as nationally, what she's seen. And so we are always trying to make sure that you have that information. So if I don't see any other questions, we just want to remind folks that as we're moving forward and doing our work, problem gambling has, as Julia said, we kind of have hitched our wagon behind, or our trailer, and really have looked at integrating information into other risky behaviors. And so when we're talking about risky behaviors, gaming is certainly one of those ones that we will be, would be tying in with our gambling behavior, the same as we would with substance abuse, marijuana use, or misuse, and all the other risky behaviors out there that we know that are individuals, not only just youth, but adults are engaging in as well. So keep integrating, make sure that you're sharing the information that you know and tying it back to the gambling behaviors as you're doing your work. We do have a comment from Francie in Lake County about Cam Adair can maybe come to another conference in the future. His presentation was really standout at the Evergreen conference that Francie had attended. And so again, we're always looking for recommendations. That was part of what we were also looking at when we put out our workforce development survey, which closes at the end of today. So if you haven't already had the opportunity to provide some information there, please do provide that there, or always send emails to me, because we definitely want to make sure that we're getting the information that is pertinent to the work that you guys are doing around raising awareness out there and to you guys. So if I don't see any other questions, so with that, we'll go ahead and end a few minutes early here today. But again, a big shout out to Julie. You are getting a little bit of applause here. Susan said this was fantastic and interesting and very engaging. So thank you, Susan, for sharing that with Julie. And with that, we'll let you all get back to your very busy days. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week, and try to stay cool.
Thanks, everyone. Keep rocking on.